Good afternoon. My name is Brad Nickason, and we are here in Lee Square to talk about green issues. Today I'm with Hunter Madsen, the leader of the community group that is working in Port Moody to save Bert Flinn Park. Hunter, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
Could you tell us a little bit about Bert Flinn Park, where it is in the Tri-Cities, and what are the issues that are surrounding that particular park at this time?
Sure. Bert Flinn Park was created by the city of Port Moody about 20 years ago. And at that time, when they set aside the land, this is land that is on a hillside. You can see as you're coming into the Port Moody area. There's a green hillside on the north side of the inlet, Burrard Inlet, and that entire expanse of green that remains undeveloped is Bert Flinn Park. And at the time they created the park, some folks in City Hall thought, well, what if we need to add to the transportation grid on the North Shore in the future because of future development? And with that in mind, let's leave a strip of land outside the park that runs right through the middle of it, and we can perhaps put a high traffic corridor through that at some point in the future if we need to. Well, that day has come. A developer's bought a stretch of land, a big chunk of land from the Imperial Oil Company on the west side of Bert Flinn Park. And
that's towards Anmore. That's on the other side towards Anmore and Belcarra.
That's exactly right. And the deal is that the city said is they're not really going to look at the development plan that these folks have in mind unless part of the deal is that they spend the money, which could be $25, $35 million, to put this road right through the park to assist in handling the increased traffic that would come from their development.
But at the present time, there's a lot of problems on Ioko Road with regards to traffic and safety, and in the summers it's tied up bumper to bumper trying to get into some of the parks in that area. What would be wrong with running a feeder road through that area? I understand it's emotional to the people that live in the area, but a lot of people would say it's just NIMBYism. Is that what this is? Not in my backyard, or is there some real value to that area?
Well, I also live in the Ioko Road corridor, and I can tell you it is very heavily trafficked today. The driving on it is dangerous. People drive too fast. There are a lot of complaints, perfectly justifiable complaints of people who live along Ioko Road.
And that's the reason why we should, or not we, why that a road would be helpful, definitely helpful to some of the people in Anmore and the other areas.
The North Shore definitely needs additional traffic options if you're going to develop in the North Shore.
Right.
It's not enough to expect everybody to drive down Ioko Road or to take the East Road alternative from Anmore. So we need to find some new alternatives, and we need also to make life better for people who live along Ioko Road.
Right.
But it's not just the only solution out there. It's not just the only solution to put a road through Bert Flinn Park. There are a lot of other things we could be doing and should be doing. Here's why. Well, here's why. When Bert Flinn Park was created, there was a trade-off that was agreed to between the public and City Hall in Port Moody. At the time, the municipal leadership was very opposed to adding this park on the hillside, and they finally said, well, okay, we'll let you do this. We're going to set aside this land up on the hillside as a park instead of developing it with more suburban tract housing. But in exchange for that, the community needs to support the densification of the downtown area of Port Moody. That's been done now over the last 20 years. The central area has been densified tremendously, but the quid pro quo, the deal was they protect Bert Flinn Park from the ravages of development. Now they're willing to put the park at risk to add a noisy, dangerous high traffic corridor right through the heart of it. It's basically going to ruin this nature park in order so that they can support additional development on the North Shore. That wasn't the deal, and now they're about ready to betray what they promised the public.
That was a commitment that was made by a previous council, and that area is it's a beautiful area, and it has nothing on it right now. Communities need to grow, do they not? Do communities not need to grow continuously in order to get the tax base to keep taxes low for the people?
Well, I guess a couple of responses to that. The broad answer is no, they don't need to, but I'll explain why that is in a moment. The rationale that, well, you got to develop, you got to grow, becomes an excuse to say yes to every development proposal that comes along. And in fact, that's a problem that the leadership of Port Moody has faced. Because they don't actually have, and I've spoken to every single city councilor individually, and I've always asked them the same question, which is, what's your optimal density for this area? How many people is enough people? How many people is the right number of people? And they never really have a clear answer. They don't even know what the density of Port Moody is. And I then tell them, I point out that Port Moody is 60% above average in terms of its population density compared to the rest of Metro Vancouver. So I say, like, what's the right number? And that's what you should be developing and growing towards, not just, how high is up, more development is always good. That's really a misunderstanding, because what you end up with is Hong Kong. And if that's the quality of life you want, that's great, but it's not the quality of life that people came to Port Moody to get. And so what our movement is about, we have 2,000 residents from the Tri-Cities so far who've joined, is preserving the park as areas develop around it. We're not opposed generally to development on the North Shore, and we know that's going to come. What we're opposed to is taking this, this area that was set aside in anticipation of development to say, you can develop housing all around it, but let's keep this green space because the community is going to need that. And sort of the point of the park was to keep it undisturbed. It's a nature park, so it's all about nature and not about us and cars and traffic.
So this open area that's at the end, the west end of the North Shore of Port Moody, that area there's a large undeveloped tract that's in private hands. What's the solution for them? Those people have made a considerable investment in that particular area. What is the solution for them in that area? They're going to want to have some kind of return. There are always going to be people in a community who say that that kind of development brings more people to as I said earlier, bring the property or bring our taxes down, but also it helps put bodies into various businesses so that there are people buying and helping the economy of the area. What then, if it's not that kind of development, what is the solution to that area? We're going to have to get people in and out of there.
Yeah. Well, I actually disagree about some of the premises there. It's not true that becoming a bedroom community to Vancouver, which is just one house after another, without much industry, local industry, without much local business, grows the tax base and makes life easier for residents. What in fact happens is when you add more population to an area, in terms of bedroom communities, just homes, townhouses, and so forth, what happens is it puts stress and expense on the local city for libraries, community centers, roadways. All these costs go up, but actually the revenue being generated by these people as employees is all being generated back in the city center like Vancouver. So, so what you would ideally want to be doing with land like this, which was former industrial land, it's Imperial Oil Company land, is ideally you should be dedicating that to some new form of, say, clean business. So maybe it's a business park with software companies and that kind of thing. If what you really want to do is improve the tax base.
Well, so say we did what you're saying, we put a different, we had envisioned that area different.
And by the way, the people who bought the land could make plenty of money that way. But to answer your question, they can, to go back, to answer your question, what they bought as land currently has a zoning to it. It's zoned for lowest density development, which means working within the existing zoning, They could put single-family homes, a certain number, on ample lot sizes,
Right.
and they could still make plenty of money. By the way, most of the land that they bought is in Anmore, 2/3 of it, a third in Port Moody, and I mention that because the lot size requirements are even more ambitious, or even larger in Anmore. So as long as they're building within lowest density zoning, that's going to bring in, it's going to make them plenty of money, but it's going to bring the fewest number of new people into the area. That's best for Ioko Road, and that's best for quality of life. They could do that today. But that's not what they want. They want much denser development.
Okay. So even in the way that you've envisioned it, or is there a different vision for that particular
Absolutely.
area? Well, and what could it be? Like, how are they going to move people along that corridor, or what other alternatives? Could you have something specific that you think or you suggest that they could do? So something that people who are just learning about this particular issue now could envision happening. What should they do?
Right. There are a lot of better ideas for the development of that area and developing the transportation grid than ruining the city's largest park and only nature park by putting basically a high traffic corridor right through the heart of it. That's the worst. That's the idea of last resort. What you should be doing or could be doing instead is, first of all, if you care about Ioko Road and all the traffic on Ioko Road, you say, number one, don't change the zoning at the end of the road of this land they've bought. Keep the low density zoning, let them build within that. Number two, develop an alternate way of and more traffic, because most of this traffic problem done on Ioko Road is coming from Anmore. So ask Anmore to step up and find a route across Anmore from the west side that's being developed into the east and then down into Port Moody on their own. And there are a number of traffic alternatives that they could be looking and should be looking at that could be funded by the developer, that would protect the park and provide an alternate transit route that would give relief to Ioko Road. Number three, the city should stop reneging on the promises it made to the residents of Ioko Road 20 years. So they've been promising for decades to make life easier on Ioko Road for the residents, but they actually haven't done much. The things they could be doing and investing in are things like adding sort of pedestrian activated crosswalks, adding better sidewalks that enable people to get up and down the street without being mowed down by people who are driving too fast, more aggressive enforcement of the speed limits there. Right. Those are the things that really drive Ioko Road residents nuts. Right. And that's something the city could be taking care of. These are all things that make life better and solve the development issues without destroying Bert Flinn as a nature park.
Right. Let me take this just in a little bit of a different direction then. Who is this park important to? Why is it such an important community jewel?
When I first heard that the developer was planning to go ahead with this long discussed plan of build a road through the park, and the developer hasn't put his proposal on the table yet, but they've presented publicly a number of times, and they've said job number one, directed by the city of Port Moody, is go get that road through the park. I first put up some signs around the park saying, hey folks, if you love this beautiful natural refuge, I want you to know that there is going to be a noisy, dangerous, high-traffic corridor running right through the middle of this virgin land. And if you have a problem with that, maybe you should go online and sign our petition. And I was curious to see who'd react. And we were flooded with responses because Bert Flinn Park has become so important to the lives of so many people, not just in Port Moody, but in the Tri-Cities area. We have 2,000 residents who've signed the petition from the Tri-Cities, 2/3 of them in Port Moody. We have the Off-Road Cycling Association in this area has been very actively supporting the Save Bert Flinn Park movement. Bunsen Burners is a group, a large group of trail runners who use Bert Flinn Park every day. School kids have been sending us, we got a whole bunch of drawings from second graders as to why they love Bert Flinn Park. The mid-school students have been writing us, talking about how they use the park for biology classes and to run as part of their exercise routine. And we hear from all manner of folks, seniors, busy busy business people who take breaks, and it's sort of a mental health break for them to come into this space, which is very undeveloped and very natural. It's also, so they're affected adversely. If you put a road through, you've destroyed the quiet getaway experience of the park. But I haven't mentioned the wildlife. You know, we are talking in an environmental context.
Right.
And Bert Flinn Park is 311 acres, which is pretty big. It's big enough to become its own ecosystem, but it's not big enough that it can tolerate what happens when you get this very, very active traffic corridor right through from one side of it to the other.
But
the
developers plan to create ways to help the wildlife in that area, have they not?
Well, what has been proposed sort of as a sop to get the local people to go along with this is they're going to supposedly protect the wildlife by putting in wildlife underpasses under this little highway that they want to build in. But if you study sort of how underpasses have to work for wildlife, and there are a couple places such as in Alberta where they've been tried, this park area is not really suitable for underpasses, and it kind of misses the point. You know, much of the damage to the wildlife ecosystem will happen merely from the fact that there's now this giant artery of endless traffic, which changes the noise space or the sound space, changes where animals feel they can cross the road. Most small animals are not going to try and find the underpass to get across. They're still going to be crossing.
I kind of imagine that's a little central hub for dinner for the larger predators.
Well, that's the other issue. You know, underpasses, especially at night, are avoided by animals because that's where other big animals are. And so, and to make them all work, you'd have to put street lights all the way through the middle of the park at night. And it's just got to, so it sounds good, this idea the developers got, but in practice, it's kind of missing the point. And the point is that if you put this noisy corridor right through the heart of what had been this serene, pristine bit of wilderness in the middle of the city, you will forever denature and spoil the experience of the park for users, and you'll make it a much less attractive place for the amazing wildlife that live there.
Right, it is an amazing space. I've walked through that park before. So presumably the council, I mean, this is a softball to you, sorry. Presumably the council is going to set aside more land to make up for that particular thing that particular area that they're going to lose in Port Moody, are they not?
Well, the other thing the developer's now talking about is that even though the roadway would occupies 22 acres through the middle of the park, and by the way, technically the roadway is not in the park. The city councilors who are all pro-development are eager to point out that it's not damaging the park because it's only building a high traffic corridor through in between two halves of the park. But in effect, it's this whole area of the park is treated as one space. It's going to have a terrible impact on the park.
Right.
So.
You said something that I think is a bit inflammatory.
Okay.
Pro-development. How do we know that they're pro-development? What we have is councillors who are looking at the needs of what they see of their community, and they're responding back. Hopefully that's what they'll continue to do. Yes. And they'll weigh this, they'll balance.
Absolutely. And by the way, I know a lot of the councillors. I've spoken to, as I said, to all of them more than once. And people are very conflicted about this. On the one hand, we Canadians, I think even particularly in British Columbia, we have a tendency to think that all development's good and that more development is better for business and better for the community. And so we have a kind of we have a pro-development bias in our thinking. So it's hard for us to know where to put the brakes on. Right. And that's why I was mentioning earlier, there are ways to think about when you say yes and when you say no, or when you say hold on to development. And our hope as a group is not to oppose the development in the North Shore, but to get them to start having the conversation about what the trade-offs are and where you put your foot on the brake. We need to hear those conversations. Yeah. It's not that they're some of them are pro-development. If you look at their track record, it's almost they never found a development they didn't like. sooner or later they green-lighted everything. And that's a problem for voters to pay attention to next time. But a lot of them are just kind of conflicted on the fence, and the developer, as they have a very sophisticated, genteel frontman, and he's done a lot of great architecture, I think, in the city before. Right. He's a likable guy, and they've only had conversations with him. So our goal as a group was to say, well, you need to include other people in the conversation with the public.
A broader conversation. Yeah. Let's take that just a little bit farther. We're going to go off track a tiny bit. You see the housing problems that we have. We're talking about reducing the amount of houses in that area, but at the same time, the Lower Mainland needs to develop, or at least needs to address the problem of housing. What can Port Moody do? And I know that the question is,
why does it need to address the problem of housing? And now I'm going to say something inflammatory. Somebody somewhere decided at some point, I guess parts of the business community or the people who lead cities and think of their cities, think they're doing a good job and things are getting better if their cities are growing. And so somebody decided that it was great for the city of Vancouver and the Metro Vancouver area to be growing by X million people over the next 20 or 30 years. I don't know why they decided that was great or necessary. I suspected, I actually think that the parts of the city, or the Metro Vancouver area, that basically hold off on destroying the things that make their community so attractive to people. The natural beauty, the undisturbed beauty that, for example, Port Moody enjoys, with this beautiful inlet in the green space. Those who hold off are going to discover that theirs are the most popular, the most in demand, the highest value parts of the city. Is everybody obliged to go and create the most, affordable housing, for example, or mass housing in every part of Vancouver? You can make sort of an equitable argument that maybe they should, but I'll tell you right now that area of North Shore is so, it's like Vancouver West to the east. It is really going to turn out to be a very high value, high expense. The property is going to be very, very valuable, and the developers who are doing their work there, they are not planning to. They're not working for. What's it? Habitat for Humanity. They're not working for Habitat for Humanity. They're not building low-cost, affordable housing there predominantly.
But they are.
They're going to be building more monster mansions on the hillside as they do in Enmore today. And the question is are we going to allow them to use the pretext that the world needs more housing as an excuse to go and build a few more monster houses for the extremely wealthy?
Right. All right.
That wasn't controversial, was it? Sorry.
Pardon me?
Sorry. Go ahead.
No. From talking to you and from learning a little bit about this issue, I'm conflicted because I find that we are going to have to solve these problems no matter what. There are going to be need for more houses, but what I hear you saying is they're not the houses going to be built in that area that we want to see. It's going to create.
It's the need. There is a need. I want to say there is a need for more housing.
Right.
That doesn't mean there's the need is for housing in every place at the same level of need. Right. In Port Moody, the downtown area has been developed and designated as a dense core. So we're building condo towers and that kind of thing, which is great.
Right.
And in fact, there are more plans down the road. The city just unveiled its Coronation Park vision, which adds 5,000 people in the downtown core with all sorts of towers and so forth. That makes sense because that part of the city is going to be well served by the Evergreen Line, public transportation, retail and services. What does not make sense is densifying the North Shore at the remote west end, the peninsula end, of an area that has poor transportation to begin with, poor services. It's like the last place Port Moody would be adding more density. And yet that's really what's being proposed, and they're throwing over their biggest, best park to get that. This does not make sense, and we're just inviting the council to reconsider the trade-offs before they make that decision.
That makes sense to me. So as we go forward, from what I understand, you created quite a stir at City Hall when you you got them to move forward on this particular motion.
You should explain. The group, in June, we announced the existence of the group by holding what turned out to be the largest ever rally. This is how much people care about this park. Right. The largest rally in the history of City Hall showed up there to say we have an issue with where things are headed. Yeah. After that, one of the councilors with vision and courage, Robert Vagermoff, one of the youngest councilors, city councilors, raised a motion to remove the right-of-way, the road right-of-way through the park, and to return that land to the park proper, and find another way to add transportation in the North Shore. And that's what got voted on in September. And it was a packed house of citizens from the community who were there to say, this park really matters to us and to our life as a community. You guys need to find another way to address transportation. So that's the motion.
Right. And I was there. I was there on that day. I saw what had happened. I saw the people. There were people from all communities in the Tri-Cities. So this is really a Tri-Cities issue, is it not?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the city councilors of Port Moody are primarily concerned, as people who need to get reelected, with how this affects the people they represent, which is in Port Moody proper. But it could not be more apparent that this park is a resource for Port Coquitlam, the entire Tri-Cities area. I meet people, and more for that matter, I meet people every single day on the trails who are from all these areas, some of them as far away as Burnaby or Vancouver, who come there to this beautiful spot to hike, to mountain bike, to take their kids in strollers, because it's an area where you could do that, to walk their dogs, to commune with nature, or just be with themselves.
Because it's not an urban park per se, like Stanley Park.
Yeah.
It's a wilderness park.
Yeah, I mean, that's worth pointing out. If the city had decided that it was just another urban park like Rocky Point, where it's got, urban parks are, you can tell they're urban parks because they have swing sets, and they have outhouses, and they have picnic tables, and they have green lawns, and what they're about is, they're not so much about nature, they're more about people coming to enjoy this lovely day together. This is more about the people. A nature park, and this is a designated nature park, Bert Flinn, is different. It's where you leave all that stuff out. It's just nature doing its thing, and people come there to be present to this beautiful thing happening in nature and get reconnected to nature. It's a different experience, and that's what's at risk now.
Right. So in your process of leading this community to at least take an interest in it, what are the things that you've done to make people aware of it? And I think it's instructional too. It's a tremendous movement when you get that many people coming to a city hall. Yeah. What did you do to go and gather that much interest from people?
It was pretty darn simple, which is an indication of just how passionate people are. As I said, I just stuck some signs on trees in the middle of the park, and I was curious to see if anybody would show up. I was asked by the press prior to the first June rally, well, how many people do you expect? I said, I don't know, we may get 20 people, maybe 50. Instead, there were several hundred. The Global TV estimated between 300 and 400 people. Basically, it was grassroots. I put up a few signs. I discovered other people were putting signs up. Somebody printed business cards and was walking around the park distributing them. The local press was interested, so we've gotten tremendous coverage. CBC first stepped in, and then Global, Tri-City News has been very closely following this. It's seen as a big potential election issue in the next municipal elections. So basically we did a lot of outreach. We did that. We subsequently went door to door with some leaflets that explained to people the things they could do if they cared about the park, which I could tell you now, and by then tell your audience if you're interested. The things we were telling people to do were, first, go sign the petition online at savebertflinnpark.ca. Second, go write an email to the City Council of Port Moody. The email is simply council@portmoody.ca, and tell them how you feel about the park. Third, make sure whenever there are public hearings that you're showing up. So we announced the June event, we announced the council meeting in September. Show up and let them know, because otherwise they won't know you're there, that you care about the park. So these are the things we've done. That's about it.
That's it. All right. So if you could just remind us one more time, your website, if you could just give us that one more time.
Okay. The website is Save Bert Flinn Park, and the way Bert and Flynn are spelled strangely, so nobody gets them.
All right.
But it's BERTFLINN park.ca. Okay. And you can find all the information about the controversy in the park there, and you can sign the petition, and you can get the email addresses to write the council. By the way, what the council decided about that motion, we should close this way. They decided in that meeting that they did not want to vote down the motion to protect the park, especially not with that crowd there concerned about the park. And they said, let's put the motion on hold for a while, and let us go do some research to find alternate ways to create transportation grids in the North Shore. I think that's exactly the right move. As Councilor Megan Lottie, who originally helped get the park started 20 years ago, she said, let's leave no stone unturned until we find another way to improve transportation without ruining the park. And this is exactly what our group wants, and we encourage the City Council to move forward with all deliberate speed and then protect the park.